The invisible architects of the economy, the global influence of think tanks. Most individuals seek the rise and fall of nations in election arenas, revolutions, or the decisive actions of powerful leaders given in public. Yet, the deeper one dives into the history of contemporary economics, a disturbing truth becomes evident. The economic balances of your current life, your job opportunities, your housing loan interest rates, your national debt, the value of your currency, and your financial freedom were shaped neither in parliaments nor in presidential residences. Quite the opposite. They were shaped in isolated venues you will never set foot in. These venues were filled not so much with politicians as with expert analysts, not with voters as with economists, and not with public debate as with consensus reached behind closed doors. Because over the last century, the fundamental ideas guiding the global economy, from interest rate policies to the rules of globalization, from market liberalization to budgetary constraints, did not emerge spontaneously. They were systematically manufactured by institutions that lack any democratic mandate, are not subject to election-based accountability, and conceal the identity of their financiers. These institutions are known as think tanks. Welcome to the hidden ledger history, where money, power, and history intersect, and nothing is as it seems at first glance. To understand how think tanks ascended to become the chief architects of the present-day economy, we must return to a period when the world was striving to reconstruct itself from great devastations. The early 20th century. World War I had ended, the international financial order was shaky, and governments struggled to make sense of new economic conditions for which they were unprepared. Modern bureaucracy was still nascent. Most government offices lacked permanent economics experts. Policy development departments, teams working on debt management, productivity calculations, or taxation models were non-existent. Consequently, this void was filled by external experts. In 1916, a handful of economists and philanthropists in Washington established the Brookings Institute, one of the earliest attempts to create a permanent, non-governmental center focused on economic research. Although it presented an academic facade, Brookings was integrated directly into national decision-making processes from the outset. Its reports impacted a vast area, ranging from federal budget practices to wartime production and early monetary policy choices. The model it pioneered, where expertise supported by private resources guides public administration, spread globally. Across the ocean, following the chaos generated by World War I and the failure of the Paris Peace Conference, another institution was born, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, better known as Chatham House. Its founding purpose was simple: to bring politicians, diplomats, financial circles, and academics together to privately negotiate global issues. However, in practice, Chatham House served as a key connection point between the British elites and the newly emerging economic geopolitical scene. By the time World War II erupted, think tanks had ceased to be mere objects of intellectual curiosity, becoming, in essence, intelligence assets and strategic advisors. They became the backbone of the intellectual structure that would form the mental framework of the coming century. Then came the RAND Corporation, founded in 1948. It was a unique fusion of academia, military intelligence, computerized modeling, and economic forecasting. RAND did not merely study policy, it practically engineered it. From nuclear strategy to game theory, risk models to Cold War simulations, the institution generated the thinking that would define US foreign and economic policies for decades. Thus, it served as a prototype for all major think tanks that followed. By the 1970s, the number of think tanks multiplied rapidly across Washington, London, Brussels, and beyond. The Hoover Institution, Carnegie, the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, the American Enterprise Institute, AEI, the Peterson Institute, the Heritage Foundation. Each possessed a distinct ideology, a different funding source, and unique strategic goals. All were locked in fierce competition for influence over the most valuable commodity in politics: ideas. The crucial point in grasping their power is this: politicians are transient, but think tanks are permanent. Administrations change every 4 or 8 years, legislative structures shift, and cabinets are renewed. But think tanks remain fixed. They silently draw the intellectual boundaries regarding what political leaders deem possible or inevitable. The global economic order was constructed precisely in this manner, not through elections, but through efforts to create consensus. Because while citizens debate the character of candidates, think tanks table principles. While the public is offered a chance to vote, they choose between worldviews. And while public opinion discusses policy outcomes, they draft the master roadmap for which outcomes should even be considered for debate. However, to truly comprehend the power of these institutions, examining their funding sources is essential. For think tanks do not operate in an isolated environment. They are generously supported by states, large corporations, defense contractors, private foundations, and wealthy individuals.
Industry contractors, billionaires, and global foundations that have direct financial stakes in the policies being shaped. Foundations like Rockefeller, Ford, Carnegie, and Open Society. Wall Street banks, giant defense companies like Lockheed and General Dynamics. Energy and technology conglomerates. Every major sector with something to gain is found on their donor lists. Although donations come with assurances of independence, the incentives paint a different picture. Think tanks almost never publish research that conflicts with the long-term interests of their supporters. They do not need to be directly instructed on what conclusions to reach. Funding simply continues to flow to the institutions that are already aligned with a predetermined ideology. Influence is achieved on a large scale in this way, not through orders, but through ideological alignment. Consequently, the economic ideas that gain acceptance as common sense in government circles tend to support the strategic goals of the most powerful financiers. This explains why the 1980s saw a storm of reports praising market liberalization, the removal of financial restrictions, tax cuts for capital owners, and the dissolution of public economic enterprises. This was not spontaneous. It was strategically organized by institutions like the Heritage Foundation, AEI, and the Cato Institute, funded by corporate supporters who desired the freedom to operate globally with fewer constraints. Simultaneously, centers like Brookings, CFR, Chatham House, and the Peterson Institute were building the intellectual foundation for globalization, the free movement of capital across borders, privatizations, trade liberalization, and the imposition of austerity as a solution to sovereign debt issues. Think tanks did not just influence policy, they established a worldview. This view posited that markets are rational, governments are inefficient, globalization is destiny, and inequality is a regrettable but necessary byproduct of progress. By the 1990s, these organizations had become deeply embedded within the governmental system itself. They continuously supplied cabinet members, central bank advisors, strategy experts, World Bank economists, IMF negotiators, and trade representatives. The term revolving door ceased to be a metaphor. It became the cornerstone of modern economic power. An individual might spend 5 years at a financial giant, 3 years at Brookings, 2 years at the Treasury, 1 year at the IMF, and then return as a senior fellow to a think tank before being appointed to a commission regulating the very industries they once worked for. This constant personnel rotation creates a subtle yet immensely powerful effect: ideological stability. Regardless of which political party wins the election, the core economic principles remain the same, because the core personnel who write these principles do not change. This explains why the global financial system today feels like it is operating on autopilot, why policies remain consistent no matter who is in power, why crises repeat in predictable cycles, why the same mistakes continue to be made even if the signers are different faces. For beneath the visible surface, the intellectual structure is stable, and it is built far from the public eye. The deeper one investigates, the clearer it becomes that think tanks are not just observers of the global economy, but also its storytellers. They define the jargon used by politicians, the frameworks relied upon by journalists, the metrics held sacred by regulators, and the narratives investors adopt when making trillions of dollars in decisions. For this reason, think tanks influence not just policies, but also perception. And perception is one of the most powerful driving forces in any financial system. To see how this operates today, consider a single report released by a respected institution. For example, from the Peterson Institute or the Council on Foreign Relations. The report warns of a possible debt crisis, slowing productivity, or the need for structural reform. Within hours, the narrative quickly spreads. News organizations put the issue on the front page. Television channels make it a discussion topic. Politicians quote it in parliamentary speeches. Central bankers pay attention because markets are focused, and thus an idea that began in a private room with 10 experts becomes a national anxiety. This is the essence of modern economic power, the capacity to transform analysis into expectation and expectation into a tangible reality. When think tanks issue warnings about inflation, markets become tense. When they demand austerity, governments tighten budgets. When they advocate for liberalization, capital moves faster. When they support international trade agreements, industries reorganize their supply chains. They set the emotional temperature of the global system. And unlike politicians, they do not need public approval to do this. Their power stems from credibility, a currency far more reliable than elections. However, this influence is not always abstract. Sometimes it directly becomes a policy draft. Consider the Chicago school economists, Milton Friedman, George Stigler, and their followers. Their work at the University of Chicago, amplified by centers like the Hoover Institution and the American Enterprise Institute, rewrote the economic understanding of the late 20th century. Free markets, deregulation, floating exchange rates, reduced corporate taxes, privatization. These were not mere academic theories. They formed the basis of Reaganomics, Thatcherism, Washington Consensus that directed global economic policy for decades. Entire nations restructured themselves based on frameworks that emerged not from democratic deliberations, but from these intellectual production centers. Meanwhile, the Council on Foreign Relations shaped America's foreign economic policy, helping to design the post-war monetary order that evolved into the current dollar-dominated system. Chatham House, working across Europe and the Commonwealth, influenced colonial transitions, development policies, and international trade structures. The Heritage Foundation played a key role in the entirety of the Reagan administration's economic program. The Peterson Institute shaped the narrative around deficits and austerity, influencing the approach countries took to debt crises in Latin America, Europe, and Asia. Finally, there is the World Economic Forum, Davos, which, rather than directly producing policy, creates consensus. When top executives, central bank chairs, and heads of state gather to discuss global risks,
supply chains, demographic trends, digital currencies, or climate economics, the result is not legislation. It is agreement, a shared perspective on what the future should look like and who should lead it. And this shared perspective has financial consequences. Consensus determines capital movements. Capital movements shape government policy preferences, and these preferences affect the lives of billions. However, the most illuminating part of this story is not how think tanks influence governments, but how they influence each other, forming a complex network that connects and reinforces models, narratives, and ideas across borders. A report from Brookings is cited by Chatham House. A study from RAND is used by NATO. A CFR analysis goes to the White House as a briefing. Hoover Institution research becomes part of a congressional hearing. A Peterson report is referenced by the IMF. Over time, these cross-references create the impression of a universal truth. When a sufficient number of institutions agree, dissent begins to look irrational. This feeds a powerful cycle. Think tanks generate ideas. These ideas create consensus among elites. Consensus turns into market expectation. Expectation shapes political action, and political action reinforces the original ideas. This feedback loop is very tight, efficient, and difficult for the public to penetrate. This is why economic policy often feels predetermined, as if the outcomes were settled long before any vote was cast, because the real debate took place years earlier in conference rooms the public never saw. This is even more apparent in the realm of monetary policy. Central banks are considered isolated from political influences, but they are not isolated from intellectual influence. They recruit personnel from the same academic circles, attend the same economic cultural linkages, Council F.
The same conferences, read the same reports, and share the same ideological foundation determined by decades of think tank output. When a major think tank publishes a paper claiming that inflation expectations are rising beyond what official data suggests, central bankers pay heed. When another institution warns that interest rates must be kept high to preserve credibility, markets adjust accordingly, and policymakers act in that direction. When think tanks advocate for digital currencies, states begin experiments. When they express concerns about economic inequality, new tax proposals emerge. In this context, think tanks assume the role of the mental infrastructure of the global financial system. They define the boundaries of legitimate debate. They determine which risks are real and which are exaggerated. They champion certain solutions while dismissing others as unrealistic. Economics is never neutral. It is always a choice shaped by incentives, and think tanks help determine which incentives become national priorities. But there is another layer that most people never see: the influence of donors on the long-term evolution of economic thought. A tech billionaire funds a program on digital currencies. Suddenly, digital currency research gains more prominence. An energy company supports a climate policy initiative. Suddenly, certain climate models or cost-benefit analyses begin to gain acceptance. A financial institution funds a project on global capital flows. Suddenly, narratives about liberalization or financial openness gain legitimacy. Donors do not need to demand specific results. Influence is more subtle than that. They simply support the experts who already share their views, thereby elevating certain voices until they become the default. This is how economic ideology becomes self-sustaining. Today, the reach of think tanks extends beyond policies to the individual financial situations of ordinary people. Their narratives shape how the media interprets inflation. They influence what politicians tell you about debt. They help determine the regulatory environment that affects your mortgage, your investments, your savings, your job market, your retirement, and your cost of living. When think tanks claim that high interest rates are essential to restore confidence, they are shaping your future borrowing costs. When they assert that globalization is compulsory, they are shaping the price of the goods you rely on. When they propose austerity policies, they shape the public services you can access. When they defend the removal of financial restrictions, they affect the stability of your banking system. Think tanks do not just shape policy, they shape the economic reality you live in.
And the final, uncomfortable truth is this: the most powerful think tanks are not the ones you can see on television. They are the ones you will never hear about. Those preparing classified briefings for intelligence agencies, those secretly funded by multinational corporations, those drafting the documents that will become the main discussion topics of the G7, those embedded within the architecture of global governance, the IMF, the World Bank, the BIS. They have no need for publicity. Their power resides behind the curtain. So, what is the lesson here? The world is not shaped by the clash between left and right, or even by the leaders who capture headlines. The world is shaped by the competition between ideas. Ideas matured, tested, packaged, and disseminated by institutions the public never elected. Think tanks are the factories where these ideas are produced. If you wish to understand how the global economy works and how to secure your personal financial future, you must understand the machinery behind the official story. Because decisions about your money are not made only in legislatures or central banks. They are made in the intellectual infrastructure beneath them. History does not repeat itself, but the frameworks that shape it do. And if you do not understand who writes these frameworks, you will only ever react to the world, not anticipate it. If this text provided you with a new perspective, hit the subscribe button. History holds the answers you are looking for. I will show you where to look.